Welcome to Equal Entertainment. I'm Tracy E. Gilchrist. After nearly 4 months of striking, the Actors Union has reached a tentative labor agreement with major film and television studios. The nearly 160,000 actors represented by the union will return to work if the deal is approved. Hollywood suffered a 1-2 punch this summer when both the writers and actors unions went on strike. The writers reached an agreement on new contracts in September. For both groups, one of the biggest issues was the rise of artificial intelligence in the industry. It proved to be a sticking point for the actors down to the stretch. One media critic says the deal is something the actors fought hard to achieve.
It sounds like the actors got concessions on practically everything they wanted. They got raises, they got additions to their pension and health fund, and they got protections regarding the use of AI and digital imagery, which, at certain points it was suggested that they would be able to digitize an actor's license and use it in perpetuity without permission. So they, like the Writers Guild, got a number of key concessions, and I think that was a byproduct of them feeling like they had to take a stand now and not wait for another contract 3 years from now.
The deal now goes on to the actors to ratify before it goes into effect. As it turns out, Tracy Chapman's fast car never runs out of gas. The artist continues to make history with her 1988 hit of that name. She's now the first Black woman to win Song of the Year at the Country Music Awards with Fast Car.
And the CMA Award for the Song of the Year goes to Fast Car, Tracy Chapman.
Tracy is unable to be here tonight, but she sent this message. I'm sorry I couldn't join you all tonight. It's truly an honor for my song to be newly recognized after 35 years of its debut. Wow. Thank you to the CMAs, and a special thanks to Luke and all of the fans of Fast Car.
Fast Car was the first single off Chapman's self-titled debut album. It earned her a Grammy in 1989 for Best Female Pop Vocal Performance. It also earned her Record and Song of the Year nominations. Bruce Willis's daughter, Tallulah Willis, gave an update on her father's health. The diehard actor was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia earlier this year. Tallulah Willis said on the Drew Barrymore show, quote, "He's the same, which I think in this regard I've learned is the best thing you can ask for." FTD is an umbrella term for a group of brain disorders that primarily affect the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain. Those regions of the cortex are generally associated with personality, behavior, and language. Bruce Willis's friend Glenn Gordon Carone told the New York Post last month that Willis is nonverbal. Schuyler Bailar was the first openly transgender athlete to compete in NCAA Division I sports. He was a star swimmer at Harvard, and he's now using his experiences to offer guidance on gender identity frameworks. Bailar tells me that this conversation is sorely needed during a time of ramped-up threats and attacks on LGBTQ+ people, especially trans folks.
In your intro, you set up when you were swimming with the Harvard men's team, and this is your first time after having transitioned. And really at the end of the day, what you're saying in this intro is that experience of being on the block, of loving something that you do, of having a passion, that is a universal feeling. And that is kind of what ties people together. And I wonder, would you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. I think a lot of people see trans people as this other, right? Over in the category, over there. I can't understand them. They're not like me. And even people who consider themselves allies still sometimes have this division between this is me and this is those people over there. And in reality, nobody is those people over there unless we think of them that way. In reality, our emotions, our experiences are largely universal if we break it down, but we have to find the paths to connect through those things. And so a lot of the book, I sort of repeat this theme of common humanity in different ways, not just the words common humanity, but trying to illustrate that the experiences that I have as a trans person aren't actually that unique if we break it down to the blocks of emotions. So when I was at my first meet on Harvard Men's Swim and Dive, I was nervous. I think everybody can experience that, right? Being nervous. I felt lonely, and I felt like I was doing something new, and I was scared, right? I think, again, everybody can experience those things. And I was very afraid of not performing at my best. And I think really anybody can experience that, but especially other athletes. So there's this universality of our experience that most people don't confront when they think about trans people. And I really want people to think about that, even down to the very basis of transness, which is related to gender. Everybody, including those who are not trans, also have a gender, right? So again, there's a universality here that we have to confront.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's right there in the title of your book, how we talk about gender and why it matters. Would you kind of give us a bite-sized answer to why language matters, why the language we use to describe or speak about someone is valuable?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I hear frequently when I talk about vocabulary, such as the word transgender or the word cisgender
Mhm.
meaning people who are not trans, people will come back with like, those are just made up words. To which I always reply, well, yes, they are. In fact, every single word in the entire English language and every other language is made up by humans. That is how language works, right? We make up these words put together by phonemes, sounds that we make, and we make them into sentences and we communicate with them. So yes, everything is made up, but the way that we assign value to them is important because it's how we communicate. So I think it's actually the crucial first step in respecting another person, especially from an identity group that you don't share, to learn the language that's most respectful. Are you always going to get it perfect? No. And I repeat that as well throughout the book. The goal isn't to be perfect, but it's to continue learning what might be best, right? What might make somebody feel seen, and to continue forward with language that reflects that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you even mentioned that in part of the book, is saying that language is evolving, and some of
Sure.
what I write here may not be, applicable by the time someone else is reading it. And would you talk about the nature of evolving language and just kind of tuning into that?
Yeah. Well, language, my hope is language is always evolving because we're always learning new ways to be ourselves. And I don't mean as trans people, I mean as humanity. The language that we use now that is considered English, it does not sound anything like what Old English or even Middle English sounded like 400, 800, thousands of years ago, right? And people think that it does. They're like, this is the English language. But if you go and listen to language from a while ago, you won't understand it. And I took a class in the history of the English language, and some of the Old English sounds very, very like you can't understand it. There's no way. So language absolutely evolved and it or evolves, and it absolutely should, right? Because we are changing. The way we understand the world is adapting, and the language, I think, should shift to fit that. And people who are really stuck on preserving language as it once was are also stuck on preserving power structures and systemic oppression as it once was. And that's a link that I think we also aren't naming as frequently, which is this understanding that if we want language to stay where it was, we also want freedom or lack thereof to stay where it was. And I'm not invested in keeping the change that we once had. I want to move forwards to where we all are liberated.
I want to talk a little bit about language. It's always been important, obviously, but it's been especially loaded lately. And we have, I don't know, 500 anti-LGBTQ plus bills circulating the country.
Yeah.
The Don't Say Gay bill. I mean, trans people are being attacked, drag shows. Would you talk about how language can be weaponized and why it's important to be careful and thoughtful about the language we do use?
Yeah, language is important, and I want to say that in my book He She They, I do give language pointers throughout the book, and I talk about how we use language, how we talk about gender, right, and why it matters. But I actually think what's more important is why we're talking about these kinds of
Yeah.
things. And we, like you said, have 500 plus anti-queer, anti-trans. Most of them are focused on transness, anti-us, LGBTQ plus bills, trying to ban us from healthcare, from sports, from bathrooms, from schools, and really from our own bodies. That's really the core of it, is removing bodily autonomy and the right to self-determination, the right to your own understanding of your own body. And when we think about that, yes, we could go down the route of language is important. So calling trans people what they are, calling trans men men, calling trans women women, allowing us to have access to our identities through language. And that's important. But I actually think that the reason we're having these conversations is more alarming. People think, oh, well, it's just about fairness when they're talking about sports, or, oh, it's just about protecting kids when we're talking about gender affirming healthcare. But in reality, the sports conversation has nothing to do with sports or trans people, and the healthcare conversation has nothing to do with protecting children, right? If they were actually invested in protecting children, just for example, maybe they would have a ton of legislation that attacks the #1 cause of death for children, which would be gun violence.
You can watch the Advocate channel live by downloading our app in the Apple or Google Play Store. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. For the Advocate channel, I'm Tracy E. Gilchrist, and thank you for watching.